On the morning of April 6, 1936, the people of Gainesville, Georgia didn't just get hit by one tornado. They got hit by two, at almost exactly the same moment, converging on the same small downtown from two different directions. To this day, meteorologists still study it as one of the rarest, most devastating tornado events in American history. A twin tornado strike so destructive it remains, nearly a century later, one of the deadliest single-city tornado disasters the country has ever recorded. This is the story of the Gainesville tornado of 1936. Gainesville, Georgia in 1936 was a small, tight-knit textile mill town of roughly 8,500 people, its economy built almost entirely around cotton mills and garment manufacturing, its downtown square lined with brick storefronts, banks, a busy courthouse, and the kind of small local businesses that formed the backbone of daily life. The kind of place where, on a Monday morning, everyone knew everyone, and the streets were already full of shoppers, workers, and schoolchildren by 8 a.m., going about a routine that felt no different from any other week. At around 8:27 that morning, without any real warning, this was still nearly 2 decades before the National Weather Service would issue its first official tornado forecast, and the entire concept of a public tornado warning was still a distant idea. The sky over Gainesville turned dark and violent with almost no notice at all. Here's twist number 1, and it's the detail that makes this disaster genuinely unique in American history. Survivors and witnesses reported not one, but 2 separate tornadoes forming almost simultaneously and converging directly on downtown Gainesville from slightly different angles, essentially merging their destructive force into a single, catastrophically wide and powerful storm system tearing through the heart of the city at once. Some witnesses described seeing 2 distinct funnels in the sky in the moments before impact, only for them to seem to blur into one overwhelming force by the time they reached ground level downtown. Meteorologists studying the event decades later, using surviving photographs, damage patterns, and eyewitness testimony, confirmed this wasn't just local legend or confused memory. This really was an extraordinarily rare double tornado event, one of the reasons the destruction in such a small, concentrated downtown area was so catastrophic compared to storms covering a similar path length elsewhere. The combined force essentially doubled down on a single small target, rather than spreading destruction thinly across a longer, wider path the way most tornado disasters unfold. The timing made everything infinitely worse. It struck right at the start of the workday, when downtown Gainesville's streets, shops, and factories were already packed with people going about their ordinary Monday morning. Mill workers arriving for their shifts, shopkeepers opening their doors, customers already browsing store aisles, none of them with any reason to expect anything other than an ordinary start to the week. Brick buildings lining the town square, structures many residents had assumed were sturdy enough to survive almost anything given how solidly they'd been built, were reduced to rubble within seconds. The historic courthouse, a symbol of the town's stability and permanence, was heavily damaged. Storefronts collapsed directly onto sidewalks crowded with early morning shoppers, burying people beneath brick and glass with almost no warning to seek shelter. But here's twist number 2, and it's the single detail from this disaster that historians and survivors alike still describe as one of the most horrifying moments in American tornado history. Just off the town square stood the Cooper Pants Factory, a multi-story garment manufacturing building where dozens of workers, many of them young women earning wages that supported their entire families during the hardest years of the Great Depression, had already begun their shift for the day. When the tornado struck, the multi-story building collapsed entirely, its floors pancaking down on top of each other in seconds, and then, almost immediately afterward, the wreckage caught fire, likely sparked by damaged electrical wiring or overturned machinery, trapping survivors beneath the rubble as flames began spreading through the debris before rescuers could safely reach them. The Cooper Pants Factory collapse alone accounted for a significant portion of the disaster's total death toll, becoming, on its own, one of the single deadliest workplace tragedies connected to any tornado in American history. Survivors who managed to escape the rubble described a scene of complete horror, trapped coworkers calling out from beneath collapsed floors as fire began spreading through debris that rescuers, working with nothing but their bare hands and simple tools, couldn't safely move fast enough to reach everyone in time. Neighbors and passers-by rushed to help dig through the wreckage themselves, forming impromptu rescue lines long before any organized emergency response could arrive. By the time the storm had passed and the fires were finally brought under control, the official death toll across Gainesville was recorded at 203 people, with estimates of the injured reaching well over 1,600, a staggering number for a town of Gainesville's relatively small size at the time, meaning a significant portion of the entire town's population was killed or injured in a single morning. It remains, to this day, one of the deadliest tornado disasters ever recorded within the boundaries of a single American city. And here's twist number 3, the part of this story that connects it to something bigger than the disaster itself. In the aftermath, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, then in the middle of his first term and deeply invested in New Deal recovery programs across the country, personally visited Gainesville to survey the destruction just days after the storm. A rare, high-profile presidential visit to a small southern mill town that brought national attention, federal relief resources, and rebuilding assistance that likely wouldn't have arrived nearly as quickly otherwise. Roosevelt reportedly toured the wreckage of the Cooper Pants factory site personally and pledged direct federal support for the town's recovery, a level of hands-on presidential involvement that was still fairly unusual for a disaster of this scale at the time. Roosevelt's visit helped position Gainesville's recovery as something of a national symbol of resilience during the broader hardship of the Great Depression, with federal programs helping fund the rebuilding of much of the devastated downtown in the years that followed, providing both material resources and a powerful psychological boost to a community reeling from tragedy. Gainesville rebuilt its downtown almost entirely from scratch, adopting a deliberately more spread out, modern layout designed in part to reduce the kind of catastrophic concentrated destruction the tight, densely packed old downtown had suffered. City planners and architects involved in the rebuilding effort studied the damage patterns closely, widening some streets and reconsidering how densely buildings should be clustered together in the town's commercial core. Some of the rebuilt architecture from that recovery effort still stands in downtown Gainesville today, a quiet, largely unremarked upon legacy of one of the worst single mornings in the city's entire history, walked past daily by residents who may have little idea of the tragedy that made the rebuilding necessary in the first place. The Cooper Pants factory tragedy also became a case study in industrial safety discussions in the years that followed, as officials and factory owners across the region grappled with how many lives might have been saved with sturdier building codes, functional fire escapes, and basic structural safety standards that simply didn't exist as a widespread requirement at the time. In the broader context of the 1930s, a decade that saw increasing scrutiny of industrial working conditions across America, the Gainesville disaster became one more example cited by labor advocates pushing for stronger workplace safety regulations, even though tornado-specific building codes would take many more decades to fully develop. Local memory of the disaster persisted for generations afterward, passed down through survivor accounts and family stories, even as it slowly faded from broader national awareness. For years, Gainesville held small remembrance gatherings on the anniversary of the storm, and some longtime residents could still point to specific buildings or empty lots downtown and explain what had once stood there before that Monday morning in 1936. Today, the Gainesville tornado rarely comes up outside of dedicated tornado history circles, quietly overshadowed by other, more widely remembered American disasters with more extensive photographic documentation or closer proximity to living memory. But for the small city that lived through it, April 6, 1936 remains the single darkest morning in its entire history, two storms becoming one, striking a downtown full of ordinary people simply trying to start their week, In a tragedy whose true scale, relative to the size of the town it struck, is rarely matched anywhere else in American disaster history. This is the soul of America, a small town that watched its heart get torn apart in minutes, and then, with help arriving from the highest levels of the federal government, rebuilt itself brick by brick into something that could stand a little stronger than before. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment. Press bell icon to be aware about next uploads.